20 Mafia boss failed to find the traitor, but poor Maid exposed him. In 1 minute, what happened next? The afternoon sun filtered through the mansion's expensive curtains as Isabel methodically wiped down the granite countertops of the sprawling kitchen. Her movements were practiced and silent, years of service having taught her the art of invisibility. The Moretti mansion, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, was a monument to power and wealth. But today, the air felt different, heavier, charged with an undercurrent of anxiety. From the adjacent room, angry whispers leaked through the walls. Isabel kept her head down, but her ears caught fragments of heated conversation. Can't trust anyone anymore. Shipment compromised. Someone talked. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrung out her cleaning cloth. After months of working here, she'd learned to read the mansion's moods like a weather vane. Today's atmosphere spelled storm clouds on the horizon. The kitchen, despite its size, felt suffocating. Crystal glasses lined the shelves, catching the light and throwing prisms across the walls. Isabel moved to polish them, each delicate piece worth more than her monthly salary. As she reached for another glass, a door slammed somewhere in the mansion, making her jump. The whispers in the next room immediately ceased. Heavy footsteps approached, their steady rhythm like a drumbeat of doom. Isabel's heart thundered in her chest as she recognized the particular cadence. Rocco Moretti, the man they called the Viper. She'd seen him before, of course, but always from a safe distance, always with her eyes carefully averted. The double doors to the adjacent room burst open with such force that the sound echoed through the kitchen. Isabel froze, cloth still in hand, as absolute silence fell over the mansion. Even through the wall, she could feel his presence. Cold, commanding, dangerous. Report. His voice cut through the silence, like a blade, low and sharp. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Isabel edged closer to the connecting door, which stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see him, tall and imposing in his tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. But it was his eyes that held her attention, hard as steel and twice as cold. The other men, all dangerous in their own right, seemed to shrink under his gaze. Nothing concrete yet, boss, one of them ventured. We're still looking into... Still looking? The words came out as a growl. Our entire operation is compromised, and you're still looking? Isabel watched as Rocco moved through the room like a predator, his movements fluid and controlled. The other men instinctively stepped back, creating space around him. She should move away, should focus on her cleaning, but something kept her rooted to the spot. Someone in this family, Rocco, continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, is a rat, and until we find out who, no one leaves this house. The declaration sent a chill down Isabel's spine. She watched as Rocco braced his hands against the heavy wooden table, his knuckles white with tension. The sun caught his profile, highlighting the sharp angle of his jaw, the cruel set of his mouth. Power radiated from him in waves, filling the room with an almost electric charge. The other men stood silent, none daring to speak. Isabel's cloth dripped quietly onto the floor, creating a small puddle at her feet. She knew she should move, should make herself scarce, but she remained transfixed by the scene before her. In all her months working here, she'd never seen the Viper this close, never witnessed firsthand the raw authority he commanded. Through the gap in the door, Rocco's gaze suddenly shifted, and for a heart-stopping moment, Isabel thought he looked directly at her. She felt the weight of that stare, like a physical thing, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. The moment stretched, taut as a wire, before his attention returned to his men. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. Isabel watched as the Mafia members shifted uncomfortably under Rocco's intense stare, their usual bravado replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. Through years of service, she'd learned to read the subtle signs of fear in these dangerous men. The slight tremor in their hands, the way they avoided direct eye contact, the beads of sweat forming on their foreheads. "Drinks," Rocco commanded, without looking at her. His voice was ice cold, sending shivers down her spine. Isabel moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving the crystal decanter of whiskey from the ornate sidebar. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured the amber liquid into heavy-bottomed glasses. The sound of liquid hitting glass seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. As she made her way around the room, serving each man in turn, fragments of hushed conversations reached her ears. The shipment was intercepted. Someone must have tipped them off. Internal leak. Marco, Rocco's head enforcer, drummed his fingers nervously against the polished mahogany table. His usual confident demeanor had vanished, replaced by an anxious energy that seemed out of character. When Isabel approached him with the drink, he nearly knocked it from her hands, his usually steady fingers clumsy with tension. "Watch it," he snapped, but his voice lacked its usual bite. Rocco observed this exchange with narrowed eyes, his gaze flickering between Marco and Isabel. She could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch, making her skin prickle with awareness. The crystal decanter felt suddenly heavy in her hands. "Someone," Rocco said, his quiet voice carrying more menace than a shout, "has been feeding information to our enemies." He took a slow sip of his whiskey, his dark eyes scanning the room. "Our operation in the docks was compromised. 3 of our men are dead." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Isabel finished serving the drinks and tried to retreat to her corner, but Rocco's voice stopped her. "Stay," he ordered, not even turning to look at her. "Everyone stays." She froze mid-step, her heart hammering against her ribs. In all her time working at the mansion, she'd never been asked to remain during a meeting. Servants were meant to be invisible, coming and going like ghosts. "Call everyone," Rocco continued, his voice carrying an edge that made several men flinch. "Every single person in this house. Now." The order sent several men scrambling, their expensive shoes clicking against the marble floors as they hurried to comply. Within minutes, the room began to fill with more people. Other enforcers, accountants, even the kitchen staff. The air grew thick with tension and the mingled sense of fierce sweat and expensive cologne. Isabel found herself pressed against the wall as more people filed in, the dim lighting from the crystal chandelier casting ominous shadows across their faces. She could feel the nervous energy radiating from the crowd, see it in the way they avoided looking directly at Rocco. "There's a rat among us," Rocco announced, rising from his chair. His movement was fluid, predatory, like a viper preparing to strike. "And we're not leaving this room until I know who it is." The assembled crowd shifted uneasily. In the shadows, Isabel noticed Marco's hand drift to his neck, loosening his tie as if it were suddenly too tight. Others exchanged nervous glances, each person seeming to wonder if their neighbor might be the traitor. Rocco's dark gaze swept the room, studying each face in turn. When his eyes met Isabel's, she felt pinned in place, like a butterfly under glass. There was something in his stare, calculation, assessment, maybe even a hint of curiosity, that made her breath catch in her throat. "Someone in this room," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "has betrayed our family, and they're going to regret that decision very, very soon." The accusations erupted like a volcano, filling the room with angry voices and pointing fingers. Men who had worked together for years now turned on each other, their faces contorted with rage and fear. Isabel pressed herself further into the shadows, watching the scene unfold with her heart hammering against her ribs. "It had to be someone with access to the schedule," one of the younger enforcers shouted, his face red with anger. "That means it's someone high up. Watch your mouth, kid," another man growled, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. "You're talking about your superiors." The crystal glasses on the mahogany table rattled as someone slammed their fist down. Through it all, Rocco remained eerily still, his dark eyes taking in every movement, every accusation, every nervous tick. He was like a predator assessing his prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marco stood near the window, his usual confident posture now rigid with tension. He kept his eyes focused on some distant point outside, barely participating in the chaos around him. Something about his stillness caught Isabel's attention. It wasn't the calm of innocence. It was the forced neutrality of someone trying desperately not to give themselves away. The leak had to come from someone who knew about the dock shipment. Another voice called out, "That was need-to-know information." Isabel's mind raced, piecing together fragments of conversations she'd overheard while cleaning. The way Marco had been making late-night phone calls in whispered tones. The unusual routes he'd been taking when driving Rocco around. The mysterious meetings that didn't align with his usual schedule. "Maybe it's one of the new guys," someone suggested, gesturing toward a group of recent recruits who huddled together near the door. "Or maybe," another countered, "it's someone who's been here long enough to know all our secrets." The accusations continued to fly, each more heated than the last. Isabel watched as alliances that had stood for years began to crack under the weight of suspicion. These dangerous men, who usually moved with such confidence and control, were now reduced to pointing fingers like schoolchildren. Through it all, she couldn't shake the certainty that had been building in her mind. Every piece of evidence, every suspicious moment she'd witnessed while going about her duties, they all led to one conclusion. The realization sat heavy in her stomach, a weight that demanded action. Her feet moved before her mind could fully process the consequences. Step by step, she emerged from her corner, drawing confused looks from the men nearest to her. The arguing voices began to die down as more people noticed her movement. By the time she reached the center of the room, an unnatural hush had fallen over the crowd. Rocco's attention snapped to her immediately, his dark eyes narrowing at her unexpected display of boldness. The weight of his gaze should have terrified her, but somehow, it gave her strength. She knew what she had to do. With unwavering certainty, Isabel raised her hand and pointed directly at Marco. "It's him," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. There was no tremor in her words, no hint of doubt. Marco's head whipped around, his eyes widening in shock or fear, or perhaps both. The other men stared at her in disbelief, some with mouths hanging open, others with hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. But it was Rocco's reaction that truly mattered. His expression shifted from surprise to intense interest. His eyes locked onto Isabel as if seeing her for the first time. The quiet maid who had always blended into the background had suddenly become the most interesting person in the room. His lips curved into the ghost of a smile, but his eyes remained calculating, dangerous. The silence stretched on, heavy with tension and unspoken threats. No one dared move or speak. They all waited for Rocco's response, for his judgment of this unprecedented situation. The fate of both Marco and Isabel hung in the balance of that terrible silence. The room stood frozen in the aftermath of Isabel's accusation. Rocco's penetrating gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. His expression remained unreadable, a mask of calculated control that had earned him the name, the Viper. Two of his men already had Marco's arms pinned behind his back, the former enforcer offering no resistance. "Search him," Rocco commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The men patted Marco down, extracting his phone, wallet, and weapon. Marco's face remained stoic, but Isabel noticed the slight tremor in his hands. She fought the urge to step back as Rocco rose from his chair, his movements deliberate and predatory. "Take him to the basement," he ordered. "Make sure he's secure." As Marco was dragged away, the remaining men turned their attention to Isabel. Their expressions ranged from suspicion to curiosity, some whispering among themselves. She felt exposed under their scrutiny, like a deer surrounded by wolves. The safety of her previous anonymity had vanished in an instant. "Everyone out," Rocco commanded. The men filed out quickly, leaving Isabel alone with their boss. The click of Rocco's expensive shoes echoed against the hardwood floor as he circled her. Isabel forced herself to stand still, though every instinct screamed at her to run. His cologne, a mix of leather and spice, filled her senses as he drew closer. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. Isabel swallowed hard. "A few weeks. I noticed things while cleaning. Phone calls he'd make when he thought no one was around. Papers he'd leave out. And you chose this moment to speak up?" His eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because today was different," she replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. The tension, the urgency of the meeting, I knew whatever he was planning was coming to a head. Rocco stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His presence was overwhelming, radiating power and danger. She could see why men twice her size cowered before him. "You understand what you've done?" he asked, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, but it felt like a threat. "By speaking up, you've made yourself visible. You're no longer just the maid who cleans my house." Isabel's heart pounded against her ribs. I couldn't stay silent when I knew something that could hurt the family. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The family? Since when do you consider yourself part of this family, Isabel?" The use of her name sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't remember him ever addressing her directly before. "I don't," she said. "But I work here. What affects the family affects me." Rocco's hand moved to her chin, tilting her face up. His touch was warm, but his eyes remained cold. "Smart girl, but not smart enough to realize that once you step into this world, there's no stepping back out." He released her chin and took a step back, but his presence still dominated the space around her. "From now on, you answer to me directly. Your days of being invisible are over. You've proven you have useful skills. Observation, discretion, courage. His lips curved into a predatory smile. I intend to make use of those skills. The full weight of what she'd done crashed over Isabel. In trying to do the right thing, she'd trapped herself in a world she'd spent months carefully avoiding. The relative safety of her position as an unremarkable maid had vanished with one moment of bravery. Or perhaps, foolishness. "Yes, sir," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir?" Rocco's eyebrow arched. "No, Isabel. You call me Rocco now." After all, his hand returned to her face, this time gripping her jaw firmly. "We're going to be spending a lot more time together." Isabel's hands trembled as she arranged Rocco's morning espresso on a silver tray, alongside the Italian pastries he preferred. This was her third day of serving him directly in his private study, a privilege previously reserved for his most trusted staff. The weight of her new role pressed heavily on her shoulders. The study door loomed before her, dark mahogany carved with intricate patterns. She knocked softly. "Enter," Rocco's voice commanded from within. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the luxurious room. Rocco sat behind his massive desk, his attention focused on several documents spread before him. He didn't look up as she approached, but she felt his awareness of her presence like a physical touch. "Your coffee, Rocco," she said, still stumbling over the intimacy of using his first name. He glanced up then, his dark eyes catching hers. "Set it here." He gestured to a clear spot on his desk. As she placed the tray down, he reached for the cup, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact, though brief, sent electricity through her skin. She tried to step back, but his voice stopped her. "Stay," he said, taking a sip of the espresso. "I want you to look at something." Isabel moved closer as he spread out several photographs. They showed various men from the family in different locations, at restaurants, outside buildings, in cars. "What do you see?" he asked, studying her face. She leaned in, careful to maintain some distance between them. The photos showed casual moments, but her trained eye caught details others might miss. "This one," she pointed to a photo of two men outside a cafe. "They're arguing. Look at their body language, the tension in their shoulders, how they're leaning away from each other." Rocco's lips curved slightly. "Good. What else? This man here," she indicated another photo. "He's wearing an expensive watch that I've never seen him wear before. And this one," she hesitated, then continued. "He's meeting someone off camera. You can see his eyes are focused on something beyond the frame, and his hand is positioned like he's about to shake hands." "Very observant," Rocco murmured, his voice carrying a note of approval that made her pulse quicken. "You notice things others miss, don't you, Isabel?" She straightened, uncomfortable with his scrutiny. "It's just part of being good at my job. When you're cleaning, you have to pay attention to details." "No," he said, rising from his chair. "It's more than that." He moved around the desk until he stood before her. "You see people, their secrets, their lies, their true nature. Like you saw through Marco." Isabel took an instinctive step back, but Rocco matched her movement, maintaining the close proximity. "I just notice things," she said weakly, "which is exactly why I need you." His voice dropped lower, more intimate. "From now on, you'll be my eyes and ears. You'll continue your cleaning duties. They provide the perfect cover, but you'll report everything you see and hear directly to me." "I'm not a spy," she protested, her heart racing. Rocco's hand shot out, gripping her chin firmly. "You became one the moment you pointed out Marco's betrayal. You chose this path, Isabel. Now you'll walk it." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "What if I refuse?" His laugh was soft and dangerous. "You won't. Because you know what happens to people who cross me. And because—" His thumb brushed across her lower lip, making her breath catch. "Part of you is curious. You want to know more about this world you've stepped into." Isabel couldn't deny the truth in his words. Despite her fear, there was an undeniable thrill in being this close to power, in being trusted with secrets. The danger that radiated from Rocco should have repelled her, but instead, it drew her in like a moth to flame. "When do I start?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His smile was predatory. "You already have." The golden afternoon light filtering through the study's windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in Isabel's bones. Rocco stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the brightness outside. His usually rigid posture showed a slight slump, barely noticeable, but to Isabel's observant eyes it spoke volumes. "Do you know why the Mafia has survived for generations?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. Isabel remained silent, perched on the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, fighting the urge to fidget under his intense gaze. "Loyalty," he continued, turning to face her. "Without absolute loyalty, everything crumbles." He moved, closer, each step deliberate. "When someone betrays that loyalty," his voice hardened, "the punishment must be absolute." Isabel's throat tightened. "Is that why Marco is still alive? To make an example of him?" Rocco's lips curved into a humorless smile. "Smart girl." He stopped before her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "But there's more to it than that. Marco wasn't just any soldier. He was family." His hand reached out, fingers grazing her cheek. Isabel fought the instinct to flinch away. "In our world, family means everything. When family betrays you..." His touch turned firmer, gripping her chin. "The pain cuts deeper than any knife." Something in his tone made Isabel look up. For a brief moment, she caught a glimpse of old wounds in his eyes, quickly masked by his usual coldness. "Come with me," he commanded, releasing her. "It's time you understand exactly what happens to traitors in our family." They walked through the mansion's corridors, Rocco's presence clearing a path as men scrambled out of his way. In the basement, the air grew thick with tension. Guards stood at attention, their faces grim. Marco knelt in the center of the room, hands bound behind his back. Despite his position, he held his head high, meeting Rocco's gaze steadily. "You know why you're here?" Rocco's voice echoed in the concrete space. "I do," Marco replied, his voice hoarse but firm. "Then you know what comes next." Marco's eyes shifted to Isabel, and something like regret crossed his features. "I do." Rocco drew his gun with fluid grace, the metal catching the harsh fluorescent light. "Any last words, old friend?" "I did what I thought was right," Marco said, then looked at Isabel again. "Sometimes protection comes at a cost." Isabel's heart hammered in her chest. There was something in Marco's words, something she wasn't understanding. Before she could process it, Rocco moved. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marco's body jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. His eyes remained open, fixed on some distant point as he slumped to the side. Rocco didn't flinch, didn't show any sign that he'd just killed a man who'd been like a brother to him. He holstered his weapon with the same casual grace he'd drawn it with, then turned to Isabel. She couldn't look away from Marco's body, from the growing pool of blood beneath him. The violence of it should have horrified her, and it did. But there was something else too. A fascination with the raw power Rocco wielded, the absolute control he commanded. The way he could switch from showing her glimpses of vulnerability to executing a man without hesitation. "Look at me," Rocco ordered softly. When she met his gaze, his eyes were dark with something she couldn't name. Power, control, perhaps even a hint of the pain he'd shown earlier in his study. "This is my world, Isabel," he said. "This is what happens to those who betray us. Remember that." She nodded, unable to find her voice. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood. Her heart continued its frantic rhythm, but she wasn't sure anymore if it was from fear alone. The evening shadows stretched across the mansion's halls as Isabel methodically folded fresh linens, her hands trembling slightly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marco's body crumpling to the floor, the sound of the gunshot echoing in her mind. The casual way Rocco had pulled the trigger haunted her, yet something about his calculated power drew her in, like a moth to a deadly flame. She couldn't forget the brief moment of vulnerability she'd glimpsed in his study, the pain that had flashed across his face when he spoke of family betrayal. It made him human, despite everything. That thought terrified her more than his cruelty. The click of expensive shoes on marble made her freeze. Rocco's presence filled the room before she even turned around, his energy crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. "Isabel." His voice was smooth, controlled. "You'll join me for dinner." It wasn't a request. She turned slowly, finding him leaning against the doorframe, his dark suit impeccable as always. His eyes, those penetrating depths that seemed to see right through her, held her gaze with unwavering intensity. "I still have work to finish," she said, gesturing to the linens. A slight smile played at the corners of his mouth, more dangerous than any frown. "That wasn't a question." Isabel set down the folded sheet, her heart racing. She'd seen what happened to people who defied him, Yet here she was, still testing his patience. Something in her couldn't help but push back, even as another part thrilled at his dominance. "Of course," she replied, smoothing down her simple black dress. "Should I change first?" "No." His eyes traveled down her form, making her skin tingle. "You're perfect as you are." He turned and walked away, expecting her to follow. And she did, because what choice did she have? Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she trailed behind him, watching the broad set of his shoulders, the confident stride that spoke of absolute authority. The dining room was intimate, lit by candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. A single table was set for two, crystal glasses catching the flickering light. It was beautiful and somehow more intimidating than the basement where Marco had died. Rocco pulled out her chair, his fingers brushing her shoulder as she sat. The touch sent a shiver down her spine that she couldn't quite classify as fear. "Wine?" he asked, already reaching for the bottle. "Please." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He poured the deep red liquid with practiced grace, then took his seat across from her. The table wasn't large, forcing an intimacy that made her pulse quicken. "You're thinking about Marco," he said, studying her over the rim of his glass. Isabel took a sip of wine to buy herself time. "Yes. Does it bother you? What I did. Should it not?" His lips curved slightly. Most would be too afraid to answer a question with a question. "I think we both know I'm already in too deep for fear to matter much anymore." A spark of approval lit his eyes. "Yet you still fear me." "Only a fool wouldn't," she replied honestly. Rocco leaned forward, his presence somehow becoming even more overwhelming. "And what else do you feel besides fear, Isabel?" The way he said her name made her stomach flip. She gripped her wineglass tighter, fighting the urge to look away from his intense stare. The candlelight softened his sharp features, making him look almost approachable. "If you could forget what those hands were capable of." "I feel," she started, then paused. How could she explain something she didn't understand herself? This pull toward him that defied all logic and self-preservation? "Yes?" he prompted, his voice dropping. Lower. The tension between them thickened, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Isabel took another sip of wine, buying time to steady herself against the magnetic pull of his presence. Isabel stood in Rocco's office, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as he studied a stack of papers on his mahogany desk. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. Her new position as his personal observer felt like walking on a knife's edge. One wrong step could send her tumbling into the abyss. "Today you'll sit in on the meeting with the Castellano family," Rocco announced without looking up. His voice carried its usual commanding tone, brooking no argument. "I want your observations on their body language, their reactions. Every detail matters." Isabel's throat tightened. The Castellanos were notorious even among Mafia families. "You want me to spy on them?" Rocco's dark eyes finally met hers, sharp and calculating. "I want you to do what you do best. Notice things others miss." He stood, his impressive height making the spacious office feel suddenly smaller. "Like you did with Marco." The mention of Marco sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "And if they notice me watching?" A predatory smile curved his lips. "They won't. You're invisible to men like them. That's your advantage." He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "You've been cleaning their homes, serving their drinks, all while gathering more intelligence than my best men." His proximity made her pulse quicken. The subtle scent of his cologne, expensive and masculine, wrapped around her like a silken trap. "What if I see something I shouldn't? Everything you see belongs to me now." His voice dropped lower, almost intimate. "Just like you do." Heat bloomed in her chest at his words, equal parts rebellion and attraction warring inside her. She should be terrified, and she was, but there was something else too, something that made her want to lean into his dangerous orbit. The meeting room was already filled with tension when they arrived. 6 men from the Castellano family sat on one side of the long table, their expressions carefully neutral. Rocco's own men occupied the other side, leaving the head of the table for him. Isabel moved quietly to a corner with her cleaning supplies, just another servant in their eyes. But she was anything but invisible to Rocco. She felt his awareness of her like a physical touch, as she pretended to dust the elaborate shelving units. His dark gaze found her periodically throughout the meeting, brief glances that sent electricity dancing across her skin. The discussion centered around territory disputes and profit sharing, mundane business matters wrapped in layers of implied threats. Isabel watched as the youngest Castellano brother's hand twitched every time money was mentioned, how the family's consigliere kept touching his wedding ring when lying. She absorbed every detail, knowing Rocco would want her analysis later. As the meeting progressed, she noticed something else: the way Rocco commanded the room without raising his voice, how his mere presence made these dangerous men shift uncomfortably in their seats. Power emanated from him like heat from a flame, and she wasn't the only one who felt it. When the meeting concluded, the Castellanos filed out with forced smiles and hollow pleasantries. Isabel continued her pretense of cleaning until the last one left, her heart racing as she realized she was alone with Rocco again. "Tell me what you saw," he ordered, still seated at the head of the table. She turned to face him, clutching her dusting cloth like a shield. "The younger brother, Alessandro. He's skimming money." His tells were obvious when she stopped abruptly, caught in Rocco's intense stare. He wasn't looking at her like a boss, assessing an employee's report. No, this was something else entirely. Something dark and hungry that made her breath catch in her throat. His eyes traveled slowly over her face, down her neck, lingering in a way that made her skin feel too tight. The air between them charged with electricity, making it hard to breathe. Isabel knew she should look away, break whatever dangerous spell was weaving between them, but she couldn't. Rocco's gaze held her captive, promising things that made her pulse thunder in her ears. The evening settled over the Moretti mansion like a heavy velvet curtain. Isabel's hands trembled as she arranged crystal glasses on the silver tray, Marco's execution still fresh in her mind. The sharp crack of the gunshot, the way his body had crumpled, these images haunted her. Yet she couldn't stop watching Rocco as he worked in his office. He moved with lethal grace, every gesture precise and controlled. Even something as simple as signing documents carried an underlying current of power. Isabel found herself studying the way his shoulders tensed when he read concerning reports, how his jaw clenched before delivering harsh orders through the phone. "Either bring me that drink or stop hovering in the doorway," Rocco said without looking up, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Isabel stepped into the office, the crystal glasses clinking softly as she approached his desk. "I'm sorry, I was just analyzing me." His dark eyes finally met hers, sharp and knowing. "You've been watching me all evening, Isabel." "Why?" Her cheeks flushed at being caught, but she refused to look away. "I'm trying to understand." "Understand what?" "How you can do it. How you can order someone's death and then sit here calmly doing paperwork as if nothing happened." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Sit down," he ordered, gesturing to the chair across from him. Isabel hesitated only a moment before complying. The leather was cool against her skin as she perched on the edge of the seat, waiting. "You think I enjoy killing?" Rocco's voice was softer now, touched with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "That I feel nothing when I order a man's death? Don't you?" He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the sprawling estate. The city lights twinkled beyond, a sea of stars beneath the dark sky. "I was 17 when I watched my mother die," he said, his words barely above a whisper. "My uncle, my father's brother, ordered the hit. She wasn't part of our world, you see. Just a beautiful woman my father had fallen in love with. The family saw her as a liability." Isabel's breath caught in her throat. She watched as his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They made me watch," he continued, his voice rough with old pain. "Said it would make me stronger. My uncle held me back while they put 2 bullets in her chest. Then he told me this was what happened to weak men who let love cloud their judgment." "Rocco." Isabel stood, drawn to him despite herself. He turned to face her, and the raw anguish in his eyes made her heart clench. "I spent the next 10 years planning my revenge. When I finally took control of the family, my uncle was the first one I eliminated. But by then, I'd learned his lesson well. Emotion is weakness. Mercy gets you killed. The only way to survive in this world is to be harder, colder, more ruthless than everyone else." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken pain. Isabel saw him differently now. Not just as the ruthless boss who'd ordered Marco's death, but as a boy who'd had his humanity carved out of him by violence and betrayal. "You're wrong," she said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Feeling nothing doesn't make you stronger. It makes you empty." Something vulnerable flickered across his face, so quickly she almost missed it. His eyes searched hers, looking for judgment or fear, but finding only understanding. The space between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension, and Isabel felt herself being pulled into his orbit, despite knowing how dangerous it was to get too close. The first bullet shattered the window behind Isabel, sending glass cascading around her like deadly rain. She dropped to the floor instinctively, her heart hammering against her ribs as shouts and gunfire erupted through the mansion. "Get down!" Rocco's voice cut through the chaos. He vaulted over his desk with fluid grace, his gun already drawn. In seconds, he was beside her, shielding her body with his own as more bullets tore through the office. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Through the broken window, Isabel glimpsed dark figures moving across the lawn. Rocco's men were already returning fire, their shots precise and devastating. "Stay close to me," Rocco ordered, his breath hot against her ear. His free hand gripped her arm, keeping her pressed against him as they crouched behind his heavy oak desk. The solid wood splintered as bullets struck it, and Isabel flinched at each impact. 3 of Rocco's men burst into the office, their weapons raised. "Boss! The Calabrese family! They've breached the east gate!" Rocco's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "How many?" "At least 20 men, heavily armed. Protect the house." Rocco's command was sharp and absolute. "No one gets through. I want every single one of them dead." The violence that followed was unlike anything Isabel had ever witnessed. Rocco moved like a predator, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. He kept her behind him as they made their way through the mansion's corridors, his body a constant shield between her and danger. A man appeared at the end of the hallway, gun raised. Before he could fire, Rocco's bullet caught him in the throat. He fell with a wet gurgle, blood pooling on the marble floor. Isabel couldn't look away from the growing crimson stain. "Eyes on me," Rocco commanded, his voice cutting through her shock. When she met his gaze, she saw something fierce and protective, burning in his dark eyes. "I won't let them touch you." More gunshots echoed through the mansion. The sound of breaking glass and screaming filled the air. Rocco guided her toward the panic room, his movements swift and sure. 2 more attackers appeared, and Rocco dispatched them with mechanical efficiency. Their bodies hit the floor before they could even aim their weapons. Isabel watched in horrified fascination as Rocco transformed fully into the Viper. Every movement was lethal, every decision calculated for maximum damage. He showed no hesitation, no mercy. Yet even in his most violent moments, his grip on her remained careful, almost gentle. The firefight seemed to last forever, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes. When the last echo of gunfire faded, 13 bodies lay scattered throughout the mansion. Not one of Rocco's men had fallen. In the sudden quiet, Isabel became aware of how close she was pressed against Rocco's chest. His heart thundered beneath her palm, the only sign that the violence had affected him at all. The hand that wasn't holding his gun was wrapped protectively around her waist. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern as he looked down at her. Isabel shook her head, unable to find her voice. She should have been terrified. She had just witnessed multiple murders, had seen firsthand why they called him the Viper. But all she could focus on was the solid warmth of his body against hers, the way his touch made her feel impossibly safe even in the midst of such danger. Rocco's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a smear of blood that wasn't hers. "This is my world, Isabel," he said, his voice low and intense. "Violence, death, constant danger. Being with me means living with this reality every day." His words were a warning, but his touch was something else entirely. Possessive yet tender, as if she were something precious he couldn't bear to break. The chemistry between them was undeniable now, crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. The manila folder felt heavy in Isabel's trembling hands. She hadn't meant to find it. She'd been organizing Rocco's office while he was in a meeting, just as she always did. But when she'd accidentally knocked over a stack of files, this one had spilled open, revealing its devastating contents. Surveillance photos of herself from months ago, reports detailing her daily routines before she worked at the mansion, notes about her family, her previous jobs, even her coffee order at her favorite cafe. But it wasn't Rocco's handwriting on these pages. It was Marco's. Her stomach churned as she read through the documents. Marco had been watching her, yes, but not for the sinister reasons she'd assumed. His notes revealed something entirely different. Target too innocent for involvement. Must prevent recruitment. Find way to keep her out of Moretti's notice. Isabel sank into Rocco's leather chair, her legs too weak to hold her. Marco hadn't been betraying the family to hurt them. He'd been trying to protect her from being drawn into their dangerous world. And she had condemned him with a single accusation. The surveillance photos told their own story. Marco following at a distance while she shopped for groceries, watching over her apartment at night, intercepting other Mafia members who got too close to her neighborhood. He'd been her guardian angel, and she'd signed his death warrant. Her fingers traced over a handwritten note. Fontana girl shows potential usefulness to organization. Recommend immediate recruitment. The date matched exactly 1 week before she'd been offered the maid position at the mansion. Below it, Marco's desperate scrawl. Cannot allow. Civilian involvement. Will sabotage if necessary. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marco's small acts of rebellion, his careful dismantling of certain operations, they hadn't been aimed at destroying the family. They had been calculated moves to keep her from being noticed, to prevent her from being pulled deeper into Rocco's world. A wave of nausea hit her as she remembered Marco's face the day she'd accused him. There had been shock there, yes, but also something else. Resignation, maybe even relief. He'd known that his efforts to protect her had failed the moment she'd stepped forward in that room. Footsteps in the hallway startled her. Isabel quickly gathered the scattered papers, her hands shaking as she tried to return them to their original order. But she couldn't unknow what she'd learned. She couldn't unfeel the crushing weight of guilt that pressed against her chest. The door opened, and Rocco strode in, his presence immediately filling the room. He paused when he saw her behind his desk, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "What are you doing?" His voice was soft, dangerous. Isabel stood, the folder clutched to her chest. She should lie, should pretend she hadn't seen anything. But Marco's death deserved more than her silence. "Marco was protecting me," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "He wasn't betraying the family. He was trying to keep me safe from all of this." Rocco's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Give me the folder, Isabel. He didn't deserve to die." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He was looking out for an innocent person. How can that be wrong? "Betrayal is betrayal," Rocco said coldly, plucking the folder from her hands. "His intentions don't matter. He worked against the family's interests. That's all I need to know. But I'm the one who—" Enough. The single word cut through the air like a blade. Marco made his choice. He knew the consequences of working against me. Whether it was for you or anyone else, the result would have been the same. Isabel stared at him, seeing for the first time just how absolute his world was, how black and white. There was no room for shades of gray, no space for mercy or understanding. In Rocco's world, you were either with him or against him, and being against him meant death. "Is that all I am to you?" she whispered. "Another piece to be moved around on your board? Another tool for your empire?" Rocco's eyes darkened at her question, something dangerous flickering in their depths. He stepped closer, invading her personal space with his commanding presence. The folder dropped onto his desk with a heavy thud. "You think I'd spill blood for just any piece on the board?" His voice was low, controlled, but held an edge that made Isabel's skin prickle. That I'd tear apart my own organization for a simple pawn? Before she could respond, the door burst open. One of Rocco's men, Antonio, rushed in, his face pale with urgency. "Boss, we've got trouble. The Calabrese family is making moves against us. They've hit 2 of our warehouses already." Rocco's posture changed instantly, his body coiling like a spring ready to release. "Where?" "East Side and the docks, they're saying." Antonio's eyes flickered to Isabel, hesitating. "Speak," Rocco commanded. "They're saying we've gone soft, that the Viper's lost his edge because of distractions." Antonio's meaningful glance at Isabel made it clear what, or who, they considered a distraction. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Rocco's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "Get everyone in position. No one moves without my order." As Antonio hurried out, Rocco turned back to Isabel. The predatory gleam in his eyes made her take an involuntary step back. "You see now? This is what weakness costs in my world. The moment. They think I care about something. They try to use it against me. I never asked to be part of this," Isabel protested, her voice shaking. "I never wanted—" "What you wanted stopped mattering the moment you stepped into that meeting and pointed at Marco." Rocco cut her off. He moved closer, backing her against the wall. "You're in this now, whether you like it or not. Isabel's heart hammered in her chest as Rocco placed one hand against the wall beside her head, effectively caging her in. The Calabrese family thinks they can use you to get to me. They think you're my weakness. His other hand came up to grasp her chin, forcing her to meet his intense gaze. Maybe they're right. The admission hung heavy in the air between them. Isabel could hardly breathe, caught between fear and something else. Something that made her pulse race for entirely different reasons. But they're making a mistake, Rocco continued, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. They think targeting what's mine will weaken me. Instead, it gives me permission to show them exactly why they call me the Viper. I'm not yours, Isabel whispered, but the words lacked conviction. A dark smile curved Rocco's lips. No? Then why are you trembling, Kara? Is it fear? Or something else? Before she could answer, another explosion rocked the building. Rocco's body instantly pressed against hers, shielding her as debris rained down from the ceiling. His protection was instinctive, immediate, and it told Isabel more than any words could have. When the dust settled, Rocco pulled back slightly, but his hands remained on her waist. You're not a pawn, Isabel. You never were. You're the queen on my board, the most powerful piece, the one I'll burn everything down to protect. The intensity in his eyes, the possessive grip of his hands, the heat of his body so close to hers. It all combined to create a dizzying cocktail of emotions that Isabel couldn't fight. Despite everything, the violence, the danger, the moral implications, she felt herself responding to him, wanting him. I won't let anyone touch you, Rocco growled, his lips barely inches from hers. You're mine to protect, mine to possess, mine to... Another explosion cut through the air, closer this time. Rocco cursed, pulling away but keeping one hand firmly on Isabel's waist. Stay close to me, he ordered, drawing his weapon. We're about to show the Calabrese family exactly what happens when they threaten what belongs to me. The morning after the Calabrese attack, Isabel's hands shook as she sorted through the papers on Rocco's desk. He'd tasked her with organizing intelligence reports, trusting her eye for detail to catch anything suspicious. The office still smelled of gunpowder and smoke from last night's violence. Her fingers froze on a document hidden between expense reports. Numbers that didn't add up, locations that shouldn't exist, and most damning of all, payments to someone high in Rocco's organization. Someone was bleeding money right under his nose. Find something interesting? Salvatore, Rocco's second-in-command, appeared in the doorway. His usually friendly smile seemed forced, almost predatory. Isabel's heart rate spiked as she noticed his hand resting casually near his concealed weapon. Just organizing, she said carefully, sliding the damning paper under others. Rocco wants everything in order after last night's chaos. Salvatore stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming in the confined space. You've become quite invaluable to him, haven't you? The maid who sees everything. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Isabel maintained her composure, though her pulse raced. I just do what I'm told. Do you? Salvatore picked up a paper from the desk, pretending to study it. Like when you told him about Marco? Did someone tell you to do that too? Before Isabel could respond, heavy footsteps approached. Rocco appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately filling the room. His eyes narrowed at Salvatore's proximity to Isabel. Everything all right here? Rocco's voice was deceptively calm. Just checking on our little bird. Salvatore stepped back, smiling. Making sure she's not overwhelmed by all this. Responsibility. Rocco's jaw tightened. Leave us. Once Salvatore left, Isabel pulled out the suspicious document with trembling hands. Rocco, I found something, I know. His expression darkened as he took the paper. I've suspected for weeks. Someone's been funneling money to the Calabrese family. Salvatore, Isabel whispered, the pieces clicking into place. He's been acting strange, watching me. And just now, Rocco's hands clenched, crumpling the paper. You're sure? The way he threatened me just now. He knows I found this. He's worried I'll expose him like I did Marco. Isabel wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. But Marco was trying to protect me. Salvatore, he's truly betraying you. Rocco moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. The gesture was possessive, protective. No one threatens what's mine. I found more proof, Isabel admitted, pulling out additional papers. Bank transfers, coded messages. He's been feeding information to the Calabrese family for months. Last night's attack, he must have told them exactly where to hit. Rage flickered in Rocco's eyes. but his touch remained gentle on her skin. "You've done well, Kara. But now I need you to leave." "What are you going to do?" "What I should have done weeks ago." His voice turned cold, deadly. "Clean house." Fear and something darker, more primal, coiled in Isabel's stomach. "Let me help. I can—" "No." His grip tightened slightly. "What's about to happen? I don't want you to see it." "Not yet." As if on cue, gunshots erupted from somewhere in the compound. Screams followed. Rocco pushed Isabel behind his desk, his body tensing for battle. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his weapon. "Don't move until I come for you." "Rocco." He cut her off with a searing look that made her breath catch. "Trust that I'll protect what's mine, Isabel. Always." More gunshots rang out. Closer now. Rocco moved to the door, his entire demeanor shifting from the man who'd touched her so gently to something lethal, dangerous. The Viper was emerging, ready to strike. Isabel huddled behind the desk, her heart pounding as chaos erupted outside. Through the crack in the door, she watched Rocco move with deadly precision, taking down Salvatore's men one by one. His violence was beautiful in its efficiency, terrible in its completeness. And God help her, she couldn't look away. The echoes of gunfire had finally faded, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Isabel sat in Rocco's office, her hands still trembling as she dabbed antiseptic on a cut above his eyebrow. The first aid kit lay open on his desk, its contents scattered across expense reports now, stained with drops of blood. "You shouldn't have stayed," Rocco murmured, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "It wasn't safe. Someone had to patch you up." Isabel's voice was steadier than she felt. The memory of his ruthless efficiency during the fight still burned in her mind. The way he'd moved like a predator, dealing death with practiced ease. Rocco caught her wrist as she pulled away, his grip gentle but firm. "You're still shaking." "I'm fine," but she couldn't meet his gaze. The heat of his skin against hers sent sparks through her body, making it hard to think. "Look at me, Kara." She forced herself to meet his eyes. The intensity she found there made her breath catch. Gone was the cold calculation of the Mafia boss. In its place was something warmer, almost vulnerable. "What you saw today." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "That's who I am, what I do. I won't apologize for it." "I know." Isabel tried to pull away, but he held fast. "I've always known what you are." "Have you?" His thumb traced circles on her pulse point, sending shivers up her arm. "Then why are you still here?" The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. Isabel swallowed hard. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. Rocco released her wrist but didn't move away. Instead, he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I think you do." The tension in the room shifted, became something electric. Isabel felt it like a physical force, drawing her toward him despite her better judgment. "This is dangerous," she managed. "Everything about me is dangerous." His voice had dropped lower, rougher. "But you're not afraid anymore, are you?" "I should be." She was close enough now to feel the heat radiating from his body, to smell the mix of gunpowder and expensive cologne that clung to his skin. "After what I saw today?" "What did you see?" His hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her in place. "Tell me." Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs. "I saw you protect what's yours. I saw—" She hesitated, then forced herself to continue. "I saw how beautiful you are when you fight." Something dark and hungry flashed in Rocco's eyes. "Beautiful?" His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "Most people would say monstrous." "Maybe I see both," she admitted. The confession felt like stepping off a cliff, knowing there was no going back. "And still you stay." His other hand came up to cup her face, tilting it toward his. "Still you let me touch you like this." Isabel's eyes fluttered closed as his thumb brushed across her bottom lip. Every rational thought screamed at her to pull away, to run before she fell any deeper into his world. But she couldn't move, didn't want to move. "Tell me to stop," Rocco murmured, his breath fanning across her lips. "Tell me you don't want this." Instead of answering, Isabel swayed closer, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding, beneath her palms, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. Rocco's grip tightened possessively. "Last chance, Kara," he warned, though his voice was strained with barely controlled desire. "Once I taste you, there's no going back. You'll be mine, completely." The Italian countryside sprawled before them, a patchwork of vineyards and olive groves bathed in golden afternoon light. Isabel stood at the villa's balcony, breathing in air that wasn't heavy with the weight of violence and secrets. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders relaxed. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Rocco's voice came from behind her, followed by the warmth of his presence at her back. He placed a glass of wine in her hand, the rich red liquid catching the sunlight. "It's peaceful," she said, leaning back against his chest. "I didn't know places like this still existed in your world." His free hand settled on her waist, possessive yet gentle. "My grandfather built this place. It's where I came as a child, before he trailed off, but Isabel understood. Before the violence, before the responsibility, before he became the Viper. Inside the villa, everything spoke of old money and refined taste. Crystal chandeliers, antique furniture, priceless artwork. But unlike the mansion, there were no armed guards, no whispered conversations in dark corners. Here, Rocco seemed different too. The sharp edges of his personality had softened, if only slightly. "Come," he said, leading her through French doors into a sun-drenched sitting room. "There's something I want to show you." Isabel followed him to an old piano tucked into an alcove. Dust covered its lid, but when Rocco opened it, the keys gleamed ivory white. He sat, patting the space beside him. "You play?" she asked, surprised. His fingers touched the keys, drawing out a melody that filled the room with melancholy beauty. "My mother taught me, before she was killed." The music continued, his hands moving with practiced ease despite what has been years of neglect. Isabel watched his face as he played. The usual mask of control had slipped, revealing something raw and vulnerable underneath. She reached out, touching his cheek gently. The music faltered. "You never talk about her," she said softly. Rocco caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Some memories are better left buried." But his eyes told a different story, one of deep wounds that had never truly healed. They moved to the villa's kitchen, where Rocco insisted on cooking. Isabel sat at the marble counter, watching in amazement as the feared Mafia boss chopped vegetables with the same precision he usually reserved for more violent tasks. "My mother believed that food was love," he explained, stirring a pot of sauce that filled the kitchen with rich aromas. "She would have liked you. Would she have approved of what you've become?" His movements stilled for a moment. "No," he admitted, "but she would have understood the necessity of it." As they ate, on the terrace, the sun setting behind distant hills, Isabel saw glimpses of the man Rocco might have been in another life. He told stories of his childhood summers here, of climbing the old olive trees and swimming in the nearby lake. His laugh, when it came, was genuine and unguarded. Later, they walked through the villa's gardens, their fingers intertwined. The evening air was sweet with jasmine, and crickets had begun their nightly chorus. Rocco pulled her close, one hand sliding into her hair as he kissed her with unexpected tenderness. "I wish we could stay here forever," Isabel murmured against his lips. "We can come back," he promised, "whenever you need peace." But peace, as always in their world, was fleeting. The crack of a twig somewhere in the darkness made Rocco stiffen. In an instant, the tenderness vanished, replaced by lethal focus. He pushed Isabel behind him, drawing his gun in one fluid motion. The peaceful night at the villa shattered with gunfire. Glass exploded inward as bullets tore through windows. Rocco shoved Isabel behind a thick marble column, his body shielding her from the spray of debris. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice cold and focused. He fired back with deadly precision, dropping 2 attackers before they could reach the terrace. But there were more, many more. Isabel's heart hammered against her ribs as shadows moved through the garden. The scent of gunpowder mixed with night-blooming jasmine. She watched in horror as Rocco engaged 3 men at once, his movements fluid and lethal. He took down 2, but the third got too close. The knife caught Rocco in the side. He grunted, stumbling back, but managed to put a bullet between his attacker's eyes. Blood darkened his white shirt, spreading like spilled wine. "Rocco!" Isabel's scream tore from her throat. More gunshots rang out, but this time they came from the perimeter. Rocco's men had finally arrived, cutting down the remaining attackers with military precision. The garden became a war zone of muzzle flashes and shouted commands. When the shooting stopped, Rocco slumped against the wall, his breathing labored. Isabel rushed to him, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound in his side. "I need a medical kit," she shouted. "Now!" His men scrambled to obey, while others secured the perimeter. Rocco tried to stand, but Isabel pushed him back down. "Don't you dare move," she ordered, surprising herself with the authority in her voice. "You're bleeding too much." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Giving orders now, Piccola? Shut up and let me help you." She cut away his shirt with shaking hands. The knife wound was deep, still seeping blood. When one of his men brought the medical kit, Isabel worked quickly to clean and assess the damage. Her fingers moved with purpose, though her heart felt like it might explode. "It needs stitches," she said, meeting his dark eyes. "Real ones. You need a doctor." "No doctors," he growled. "Too risky. You do it." Isabel wanted to argue, but the steel in his voice stopped her. Instead, she threaded the curved needle from the kit, trying to steady her hands. Rocco watched her intently as she began to stitch, not even flinching as the needle pierced his skin. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice rougher than usual. "I worked in an emergency room before you, before everything changed. I was a receptionist, but I watched. I learned." His hand caught her wrist as she tied off another stitch. "You're full of surprises, Isabel." She focused on the wound, not trusting herself to meet his gaze. "Hold still. I'm almost done." When she finished, Rocco's men helped move him to the master bedroom. Isabel cleaned up while they reported. 3 of their own wounded, 8 attackers dead. A rival family making their move, thinking the villa would be an easy target. Later, after everyone else had gone, Isabel sat on the edge of the bed, watching Rocco's chest rise and fall. His skin was too pale, dark circles under his eyes betraying the pain he wouldn't admit to. "You could have died," she whispered, touching his face gently. He caught her hand, pressing it to his chest where she could feel his heartbeat. "It takes more than that to kill me, Piccola. I'm not going anywhere." But Isabel saw past the bravado. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the way his hand trembled slightly against hers. For the first time, she truly understood. Even the Viper wasn't invincible. Under all that power and violence was a man who bled like any other. "Rest," she said softly, running her fingers through his dark hair. "I'll keep watch." His eyes drifted closed, but his grip on her hand remained firm. In that moment, something shifted between them. The facade of the untouchable Mafia boss cracked, revealing the human beneath. A man who trusted her enough to show weakness, to let her see him vulnerable. The mansion's library was silent except for the rustling of papers. Isabel's fingers trembled as she pieced together the documents she'd discovered hidden in a false drawer of Marco's old desk. The moon cast long shadows through the tall windows, and her heart pounded with each new revelation. Bank statements, coded messages, photos that made her blood run cold. She spread everything across the mahogany desk, connecting threads that painted a picture far darker than she'd imagined. Marco hadn't been working alone. The betrayal went deeper, reaching into the very heart of Rocco's organization. There were names she recognized, trusted captains, men who sat at Rocco's table and broke bread with him. But what made her stomach twist was the signature at the bottom of a particular document. Antonio Moretti, Rocco's own uncle. "Oh God," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. The conspiracy wasn't just about money or territory. They planned to destroy Rocco completely, to strip him of everything he'd built. Antonio had been orchestrating it all, using Marco as a puppet while keeping his own hands clean. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. She quickly gathered the evidence, her hands shaking as she stuffed everything into a folder. The door opened, and Salvatore, one of Rocco's most trusted men, stepped in. "Miss Fontana, the boss wants to see you." Isabel clutched the folder to her chest. "Now?" Immediately. The walk to Rocco's office felt like marching to her own execution. The folder burned against her chest, heavy with secrets that could tear his world apart. When she entered, Rocco was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the night sky. "Close the door," he commanded without turning. Isabel did as she was told, then stood there, uncertain. The silence stretched between them like a rubber band about to snap. "You've been going through Marco's things," he said finally, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned, with intensity. "Yes," she admitted. There was no point in lying. "Show me." She approached his desk slowly, laying out the documents one by one. With each piece of evidence, the muscle in Rocco's jaw tightened. When she placed the document bearing his uncle's signature in front of him, his hand clenched into a fist. "Antonio," he breathed. the name like poison on his tongue. "There's more," Isabel said softly. She showed him the photos, secret meetings, handshakes with rival families, all orchestrated by his uncle. "They've been planning this for months." Marco was just the beginning. Rocco's face transformed into something terrible and beautiful, like a storm gathering on the horizon. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Get everyone here. Now." Within minutes, the office filled with his top lieutenants. Isabel noticed how some of them, the ones whose names were in those documents, shifted nervously. They knew their time was up. "Gentlemen." Rocco's voice was deadly calm. "It seems we have some housekeeping to do." He nodded to his most loyal men, who drew their weapons. 3 of the captains were forced to their knees. There was no resistance they knew better than to fight. "My own blood," Rocco said, walking around his desk. "My own uncle. Tell me, how long has Antonio been planning to take everything from me?" None of them answered. Rocco didn't need them to. "Where is he?" One of them, Giuseppe, broke. "The warehouse on the docks. He's waiting for word that—" A single gunshot silenced him. Isabel flinched but couldn't look away as Rocco systematically executed each traitor. The sound of bodies hitting the floor made her stomach turn, yet she remained rooted to the spot, watching as Rocco restored order to his world with brutal efficiency. "Clean this up," he ordered his remaining men. "Then bring me my uncle." Isabel stood at the window of her bedroom in the Moretti mansion, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Her fingers traced the cool glass as she reflected on everything that had happened. The executions from last night still played in her mind, the sound of gunshots, the thud of bodies, Rocco's cold efficiency in dealing with traitors. She should be running. Any sane person would flee from this world of violence and betrayal. But as she packed her small bag, her hands trembled and stopped. The thought of leaving made her chest ache in a way she couldn't ignore. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, a woman she barely recognized anymore. Gone was the timid maid who had first entered this mansion. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who had seen the darkest parts of this world and survived. A knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, knowing who it would be. Rocco entered, still wearing the same clothes from last night. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, but his presence still commanded the room. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, coming to stand beside her at the window. "You're planning to leave." It wasn't a question. His eyes fell on the half-packed bag on her bed. "I should," Isabel whispered, but didn't move away when he stepped closer. "But you won't." His voice was soft, dangerous. "How can you be so sure?" He turned her to face him, his touch gentle despite the violence she knew those hands were capable of. "Because you understand now. You've seen everything, the darkness, the violence, the truth of who I am. And you're still here." Isabel's heart raced. He was right. She had seen him execute men without hesitation, had witnessed his ruthless nature firsthand. Yet instead of running, she found herself drawn closer, like a moth to a flame. "I watched you kill those men last night," she said, her voice barely audible. "I should be terrified of you. Are you?" She met his gaze. "No, that's what scares me more than anything." Rocco's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the memories of his actions from the previous night. "You've changed me," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him something. "I've never trusted anyone, not since my family's betrayal. But you—" He paused, struggling with the emotion. "You're the only one I trust completely." Isabel leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. She thought of all the moments that had led to this, the way he protected her, his rare smiles meant only for her, the gentle touches that belied his violent nature. "I love you," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "God help me, but I do. Even knowing what you are, what you do, I love you." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Loving Rocco meant accepting everything about his world, the violence, the danger, the constant threat of betrayal. It meant walking into darkness with her eyes wide open. His grip on her tightened, and she saw something flash in his eyes: possession, need, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "You're mine now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No matter what happens, no matter who comes for us, you're mine." Isabel knew she should feel trapped by those words, should resist being claimed so completely. Instead, she felt a surge of warmth, of belonging. In Rocco's dangerous world, his possession meant protection, meant standing at his side as an equal. "And you're mine." she replied, reaching up to touch his face. All of you, the darkness and the light. The sunrise painted them both in golden light as they stood there, two souls bound together by love and darkness, understanding that there was no turning back now. Rocco's office was silent, except for the steady ticking of an antique clock. He sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing intelligence reports when his phone buzzed. The message made his blood run cold. The maid needs to be eliminated. She knows too much. His fingers tightened. Around the phone, knuckles turning white. The message was from Antonio, his consigliere, the man he'd trusted to handle his most sensitive operations for the past decade. Security footage from the mansion's cameras flashed across his computer screen. Isabel moved through the halls, unaware of the target on her back. She paused to straighten a painting, her blonde hair catching the light. Something protective and primal stirred in Rocco's chest. The door burst open. "Boss." Carlo, his head of security, rushed in. "We intercepted communications. Antonio's men are already in position around the mansion." Rocco was on his feet instantly, pulling his gun from its holster. "Where is she?" "East wing, 3rd floor. But boss, there's more. We found evidence that Antonio's been working with the Costello family. He's been feeding them information for months." The betrayal cut deep, but Rocco pushed the pain aside. There would be time for revenge later. Right now, only one thing mattered. He strode through the mansion's corridors, Carlo and 2 other guards flanking him. The security cameras had shown 4 of Antonio's men entering through different points. They were trained killers, experts in silent elimination. A muffled thud echoed from above. Rocco took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding not from exertion but from something he hadn't felt in years' fear. Not for himself, but for her. The sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. A scream, Isabel's scream, pierced the air. "Lock down the mansion," Rocco ordered, his voice deadly calm despite the rage building inside him. "No one gets out alive." He rounded the corner just as one of Antonio's men kicked down the door to Isabel's room. Without hesitation, Rocco put a bullet through the back of his head. The man crumpled, but Rocco was already moving past him. Inside, Isabel had backed herself into a corner, wielding a broken lamp as a weapon. Another attacker lay unconscious at her feet. She'd clearly put up a fight. Pride mingled with his fury. "Rocco!" she called out, relief flooding her face. A shadow moved behind her. "Don't move." Antonio's voice rang out as he pressed a gun to Isabel's head. "Or I'll paint the walls with her blood." Rocco's grip tightened on his weapon, but he kept it lowered. His eyes met Isabel's, seeing not fear but trust in her gaze. "The Costellos offered me a better deal," Antonio explained, his voice smooth. "Nothing personal, boss. But she's a liability. She knows too much about our operations." "You're right about one thing," Rocco's voice was ice. "This isn't personal." He saw Isabel's slight nod, the tension in her muscles. In one fluid motion, she dropped and drove her elbow back into Antonio's stomach. The consigliere's grip loosened just enough. Rocco didn't hesitate. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. Antonio's body hit the floor, eyes wide with surprise, 2 perfect holes in his chest. The room fell silent except for their heavy breathing. Rocco crossed to Isabel in 3 long strides, his hands running over her, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, leaning into his touch. "I knew you'd come." His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. The scent of her hair, the warmth of her body against his, it grounded him, kept the killing rage at bay. "Anyone who threatens you dies," he promised, his voice rough. "No exceptions." Gunfire erupted from below as his men dealt with the remaining threats. Rocco kept Isabel close, shielding her with his body even though the danger had passed. Through the broken window, dawn was breaking over the city. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the bodies on the floor, a stark reminder of the violence that defined their world. But Rocco's focus remained on the woman in his arms, the only person who had ever made him feel something beyond the cold emptiness of power. Isabel stood at the window of Rocco's office, watching his men mobilize. Below, black SUVs lined the driveway, heavily armed guards moving with practiced precision. The morning sun caught the metal of their weapons, creating brief flashes of light. Her fingers traced the bruise forming on her arm from Antonio's grip. The memory of his betrayal was still fresh, but something had changed inside her. The fear that once paralyzed her had transformed into a strange kind of strength. "They're all in position," Carlo reported from the doorway. Rocco didn't look up from the blueprints spread across his desk. "The Costello compound? Under surveillance." Our intel confirms 28 men on site, heavily armed. They're expecting us. Isabel turned from the window, studying Rocco's face. His expression was carved from stone, but she could read the tension in his shoulders, the controlled fury in his movements. Antonio's betrayal had shaken him more than he'd admit. "Your coffee, sir." A maid entered timidly, setting down a cup. "Stop." Isabel's voice cut through the room. Everyone froze. "That's not Maria." The fake maid's hand twitched toward her pocket. Rocco moved faster. In one fluid motion, he had the woman pinned to the desk, a gun pressed to her temple. A syringe clattered to the floor. "Costello's getting sloppy." Rocco's voice was terrifyingly calm. "Sending an amateur." The woman spat at him. "He sends a message. Everything you love will be taken from you." Rocco's expression didn't change as he pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the room, but Isabel didn't flinch. She'd seen enough death in the past few hours to last a lifetime. "Sweep the entire mansion," Rocco ordered. "I want every servant verified. No one gets near Isabel without my approval." Carlo nodded and left, leaving them alone with the body cooling on the desk. "You saved my life," Rocco said quietly, moving to stand before her. Again, Isabel met his gaze. "I'm starting to make a habit of it." His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing over her skin. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the violence they'd just witnessed. "You see things others miss. You see me." "I see everything," she whispered. "The monster and the man. I'm not afraid anymore. You should be." His eyes darkened. "What I'm about to do to the Costellos will protect us," she finished. "I understand now. This world. Your world. It only knows one language." "Our world," he corrected. "There's no going back, Isabel. The moment you pointed at Marco, you became part of this. Part of me." She thought of the quiet life she'd once led, cleaning rooms and keeping her head down. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I know." Gunfire erupted from somewhere in the compound. Rocco's phone buzzed with updates, but his focus remained on her. His fingers traced the bruise on her arm, his touch feather-light despite the rage in his eyes. "They tried to take you from me," he said, voice low and dangerous. "That's a death sentence." "Rocco," he pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair. "No one touches what's mine. No one threatens you. I'll burn their whole fucking empire to the ground." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat coursing through her veins. She'd seen what he was capable of, the destruction he could unleash. But she'd also seen how he looked at her when no one else was watching, felt the gentleness in his touch that was reserved only for her. "I know you will," she said softly, her hands resting on his chest. She could feel his heart racing beneath her palm, the only sign of his inner turmoil. More gunfire, closer now. The war was starting, and there would be no mercy. Rocco's empire against the Costellos, with her at the center of it all. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like a man heading into battle. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. "No one will ever take you from me," he growled. "You're mine, Isabel. Forever." She nodded, accepting her fate. This was her life now, violence and danger, power and protection, and a love so consuming it terrified her. But as Rocco held her close, preparing for the bloodshed to come, she knew she wouldn't have it any other way. The night exploded in gunfire and screams. From her position behind bulletproof glass in Rocco's office, Isabel watched the chaos unfold across the compound. Security lights illuminated the grounds like a twisted stage, casting long shadows as men fought and died. Rocco stood at the center of it all, a dark angel of death. His movements were precise, calculated, each shot finding its mark. Bodies dropped around him, but he remained untouchable. The Viper, they called him. Now she understood why. "Sir, East Wing is secured," Carlo's voice crackled through the radio. 5 hostiles eliminated. "Good." Rocco's reply was clipped. "Push them toward the garage. No escape routes." Isabel's fingers pressed against the cold glass. The violence should have horrified her, but something had changed inside her. Every dead enemy meant their survival. Every pull of Rocco's trigger was a promise kept. An explosion rocked the west side of the compound. Orange flames licked the night sky as black smoke billowed upward. Through the chaos, she spotted Antonio Costello himself, flanked by his most trusted men. They were making a final stand. "Rocco," she spoke into the radio, voice steady. Costello. By the burning Mercedes. Rocco's head snapped in that direction. Even from this distance, she could see the predatory grace in his movements as he stalked toward his prey. Antonio's men formed a protective circle, but they were no match for Rocco's fury. The first man fell with a shot to the throat. The second barely had time to aim before Rocco's bullet found his heart. 3 more dropped in rapid succession, their bodies hitting the pavement like fallen chess pieces. Antonio stood alone now, his expensive suit stained with blood and soot. He raised his hands in surrender, but Isabel knew there would be no mercy, not after he had tried to take her. "You really love her, don't you?" Antonio's words carried across the courtyard. The great viper, brought low by a maid. Rocco's response was a bullet to Antonio's knee. The man crumpled, screaming. "She saw through your lies," Rocco said, advancing slowly. "She saw what you really are. A coward who sends assassins after women. She made you weak." Antonio spat blood. "The whole underworld sees it. The mighty Moretti, playing house with his servant girl." Another shot, another scream. Antonio's other knee shattered. "I am stronger with her." Rocco's voice was ice. "She gives me purpose, direction, something you never understood." Isabel's heart raced. Even now, even here, his words made her pulse quicken. This dangerous, violent man was hers, just as she was his. "Kill me then," Antonio growled. "But others will come. They'll take her from you, break you." Rocco knelt beside the fallen boss, pressing his gun under Antonio's chin. "No one will touch her. Your death is a message. Anyone who tries to harm her dies screaming." The final shot echoed across the compound. Antonio Costello, once one of the most powerful men in the criminal underworld, slumped lifeless to the ground. Silence fell. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows over the scene of carnage. Bodies littered the courtyard, blood darkening the pavement. This was the price of power, of love in their world. Rocco turned toward the office, his eyes finding hers through the glass. Even splattered with blood, he moved with deadly grace. This was the man she had chosen, the monster she loved. The door opened, and he filled the frame with his presence. His suit was ruined, torn and stained, but his eyes were clear, focused entirely on her. "It's done," he said simply. Isabel crossed the room to him, her hands reaching up to cup his face. She could feel the tension in his jaw, the barely contained violence still thrumming through him. "You protected what's yours," she whispered, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close despite the blood on his clothes. "Always," he breathed into her hair. "They thought you made me weak. They didn't understand that you make me unstoppable." Isabel pressed closer, breathing in gunpowder and expensive cologne. This was her life now. Violence and power, death and devotion. But in Rocco's arms, she felt only strength, only purpose. The dawn broke over the compound, painting the sky in shades of crimson that matched the bloodstains on the pavement. Isabel stood by the window of Rocco's office, watching his men clear away the evidence of last night's violence. The familiar efficiency of their movements no longer disturbed her. Rocco's reflection appeared behind her in the glass. He'd changed into a fresh suit, dark gray this time, but nothing could hide the dangerous energy still radiating from him. His hand settled on her shoulders, warm and possessive. "You're thinking too hard," he murmured, his breath tickling her ear. "I'm thinking about how different everything is now." Isabel leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "A few months ago, I was just a maid. Now you're mine." His grip tightened slightly. "The queen to my king." She turned in his arms, studying the sharp planes of his face. The cut above his eyebrow had been cleaned, but it would leave another scar. Another mark of his devotion to protecting what was his. "Your men," she started. "Will they accept this? Accept me?" Rocco's laugh was dark. They saw what happened to those who didn't. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing over her lower lip. "But it's more than that. You've proven yourself. Your instincts about Marco, about Antonio's betrayal. You see things others miss." "I see you," Isabel whispered. "The real you, beneath all this." His eyes softened, something only she got to. "Witness. You're the only one who ever has." The door opened, and Carlo entered with a stack of papers. He paused, noting their intimate position, but didn't comment. These days, the sight of their boss holding Isabel was common enough. "The cleanup is almost complete, sir," Carlo reported, "and the other families are falling in line. Word of Costello's fate has spread." Rocco nodded but didn't release Isabel. Good. Make sure they understand. This wasn't just about territory. This was about respect. They understand, boss. Carlo's eyes flickered to Isabel. No one will dare move against your woman again. After Carlo left, Isabel traced the line of Rocco's jaw with her fingertips. Your world will never be peaceful, will it? No, he admitted. There will always be threats, always be blood. But you've seen the worst of it now, and you're still here. I'm still here, she agreed. Because despite everything, the violence, the danger, the darkness, you've shown me something real, something true. Rocco pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair. You changed everything, Isabel. Walked into my life in that simple maid's uniform and turned my world upside down. She smiled against his chest. I was terrified of you then. And now? Now I know the truth. You're still dangerous, still lethal, but not to me. Never to me. His kiss was fierce, possessive, marking her as his all over again. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. I'll burn down the world to keep you safe. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours. Isabel ran her hands over his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her palm. And everything I am belongs to you. The innocent maid is gone, Rocco. I chose this life. I chose you. Around them, the compound hummed with activity. Cars were being cleaned, evidence disposed of, power consolidated. This was their kingdom, built on blood and bullets, maintained through fear and force. But in this moment, it was also built on something else. Love, fierce and unbreakable. We're stronger together, Rocco declared, his voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. They thought you were my weakness, but they were wrong. You make me stronger, make me better. Isabel lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without fear. She was no longer the timid maid who'd first caught his attention. She was his equal now, his partner in all things. We'll face whatever comes next together. The morning sun cast long shadows through the window, but neither of them feared the darkness anymore. They had found their light in each other, even in this world of shadows. The setting sun cast long shadows across Rocco's expansive office, the golden light reflecting off the crystal decanters that lined his bar. Isabel sat perched on the edge of his mahogany desk, watching him review reports from their territories. Even in these quiet moments, power radiated from him like heat from a flame. She'd learned to read his moods and the subtle shifts of his expression. The slight furrow between his brows meant satisfaction. Their latest move against the Rossetti family had secured 3 more neighborhoods under their control. His fingers, usually restless when agitated, lay still against the papers. The shipments are running smoothly now, Rocco said without looking up, somehow sensing her attention. Carlo's new system is working better than expected. Of course it is, Isabel replied, a small smile playing at her lips. I helped design it. That earned her one of his rare grins, sharp and appreciative. You did. Who would have thought my little maid would become such a skilled strategist? I learned from the best. She slid off the desk, moving to stand behind his chair. Her hands found his shoulders, working at the tension she found there. Though, I prefer to think of it as survival instinct. Rocco leaned back into her touch, his head tilting to rest against her stomach. You're more than just a survivor now, Bella. You're a queen. The word sent a shiver down her spine. It was true. In the weeks since their final victory, she'd stepped fully into her role at his side. The other families might have whispered about the boss's former maid, but none dared speak against her openly. Not after what happened to the last person who questioned her place. The men respect you, Rocco continued, reaching up to capture one of her hands. They've seen your strength, your loyalty. They fear you, she corrected gently. They fear us, he countered, turning in his chair to face her. Together. His eyes, usually cold when dealing with business, held that particular warmth reserved only for her. Isabel remembered the first time she'd seen that look, after she'd pointed out Marco's betrayal. Even then, terrified and uncertain, something in her had recognized the significance of that softened gaze. Rising from his chair, Rocco pulled her against him. One hand settled at the small of her back while the other cupped her face. The calluses on his fingers were familiar now, a reminder of the violence he was capable of. Yet his touch remained gentle, almost reverent. Do you remember? He murmured. The night you first stood up to me? When I threatened to kill that bartender for shorting our protection money? Isabel nodded. I told you it would cause more problems than it solved. That fear alone wasn't enough to ensure loyalty. You were right. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You've always seen clearer than anyone else. Seen me clearer. I see all of you, she whispered. The darkness and the light, the monster and the man. Their empire had been built on blood and bullets, on threats and violence. But in these private moments, there was something else. Something that transformed their dangerous dance into something beautiful. Something real. Rocco's arms tightened around her. You changed everything, Isabel. Made me question things I'd always taken for granted. Made me want to be better, even while accepting the worst parts of me. She pressed closer, breathing in his familiar scent, expensive cologne and gunpowder. We built this together. Every victory, every sacrifice. And now no one can touch us. His voice dropped lower, possessive. No one can tear us apart. The setting sun painted them both in shades of gold and shadow as Rocco pulled her even closer, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered, "You're mine forever." The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office. Isabel traced her fingers along the cool glass, watching the city that now belonged to them. Behind her, Rocco's presence filled the room like a tangible force, commanding, powerful, and completely devoted to her. "Remember when I was just your maid?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. The reflection in the glass showed Rocco's approach, his movements as graceful as a predator's. "You were never just anything, Bella," he replied, his hand settling on her waist. "Even then, you saw things others missed. You challenged me when no one else dared." The empire they'd built together sprawled beneath them. Their territory had expanded beyond the original Moretti holdings, stretching across boroughs and state lines. Every decision they made affected thousands, both in their organization and beyond. Isabel leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "The other families have finally stopped whispering about us. About me. They learned their lesson." His voice held that dangerous edge she'd come to know so well. The last family that had dared question her position no longer existed. She turned in his arms, studying the face she knew better than her own. The sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes, the small scar above his eyebrow from a fight years ago. He'd changed since she first met him. Not softened exactly, but evolved. His ruthlessness now had purpose beyond mere power. "The shipments from Europe are increasing," she said, switching to business. "Our new route through Canada is working perfectly." Rocco's lips curved into a proud smile. "Your idea. You always see the angles I miss. We complement each other." She reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture that had become natural over time. "Your strength, my strategy. Your fury, my focus. My darkness, your light," he suggested, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "No," Isabel shook her head. "We both have darkness now. The difference is, we understand each other's shadows." The setting sun painted the office in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the expensive furniture. On Rocco's desk, reports waited for their attention. Territory disputes to settle, alliances to consider, profits to count. The business of their empire never stopped. But in this moment, they allowed themselves to simply be. Rocco's hands slid up her arms, leaving trails of heat in their wake. "You've adapted to this life better than I ever imagined. I had a good teacher," she teased. But they both knew it was more than that. She'd found her own power in this world, earned her place through more than just their relationship. The door opened, and one of their guards appeared. "Boss, the meeting with the Calabrese family is in 10 minutes. Rocco nodded, his expression shifting back to the cold mask of the Viper. But his touch remained gentle as he squeezed Isabel's hand. "Ready?" She straightened her shoulders, assuming the pose that had earned her respect among their associates. Confident, elegant, and just as dangerous as her husband. Always. Together, they moved toward the conference room where their latest business partners waited. The clicks of her heels matched the rhythm of his steps, a synchronized dance they'd perfected over time. Their empire had been forged in blood and bullets, but it was maintained through their united strength. As they approached the double doors, Rocco paused. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the depth of emotion in his eyes. "Ti amo, Bella. More than power, more than life." Isabel squeezed his hand, her own heart full. "I know. Now, let's show them why we rule this city." The doors opened, and they stepped forward together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their love had survived betrayal, violence, and transformation. Now, it was the foundation of their strength, as unshakable as the empire they'd built. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.